It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. We won't be your loophole. A deepening row between Westminster and Dublin over Ireland's plans to send asylum seekers back to the UK and the UK's plans to reject them. Rishi Sunak's flagship policy is in sharp focus as he refuses to rule out a summer general election in an exclusive interview with Sky News. Humza Yousaf fights for his career under pressure to make a pact on Scottish independence in return for political support. Police identify the man whose torso was found in Salford and find human remains at 2 more locations. Plus, slick production, sharp pundits and players worshipped like gods. We go inside the world of esports. Title-chasing Arsenal beat rivals Tottenham to stay top of the Premier League. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. There's a deepening row between Dublin and Westminster tonight, with the Irish government planning to return asylum seekers to the UK and the UK saying it will reject them. Speaking to Sky News, Rishi Sunak said migrants crossing the border from Northern Ireland showed that the Rwanda plan is working as a deterrent. His counterpart in Dublin, Simon Harris, says Ireland will not be used as a loophole and is drawing up plans for a new returns policy. But tonight, a government source said the UK will not accept any asylum returns from Ireland until France accepts them from Britain. Our political correspondent Rob Powell reports.
I'm so nervous to touch anything.
Treading carefully at a high-tech lab in Hertfordshire, but time is running short for caution.
Now click the green button.
Rishi Sunak will have to press go on an election soon, and speaking exclusively to Sky News, he left the door open to a summer vote.
You're not going to rule out July.
You're going to try and draw whatever conclusion you want from I say. I'm going to always say the same thing. You should just listen to what I've said, the same thing I've said all year.
Another question the Prime Minister has faced all year is how to stop small boat arrivals. The Irish government has suggested migrants are now making their way from the UK to Ireland over fears they'll be deported to Rwanda. Immigration has already been causing tensions in the Irish Republic, with ministers in Dublin now looking at laws to return people to the UK and a meeting with the UK Home Secretary due on Monday. But Rishi Sunak says it shows his approach is working.
The deterrent is, according to your comment, already having an impact because people are worried about coming here, and that demonstrates exactly what I'm saying. If people come to our country illegally but know that they won't be able to stay, they're much less likely to come.
One person not convinced is Dr Dan Poulter. Until this weekend, a Conservative MP, he's now crossed the floor to Labour, saying he couldn't look his NHS colleagues in the eye while remaining a Tory.
Well, I think it's a reflection of the state of the modern Conservative Party, and I think it reflects the disaffection and disillusionment felt by millions of Conservative voters across the country who are thinking about who to vote for at the next general election. And I think it also reflects a changed Labour Party, frankly, that someone like Dan Poulter, who has worked in the NHS, cares passionately about the NHS, has come to the conclusion that only Labour can be trusted with the NHS.
But do voters agree? This week will provide something of an answer as local elections take place across England and Wales. The results may be bruising for Rishi Sunak.
Do you feel disappointed that the Conservative Party has dragged you down? It's ruining your reputation.
No, I don't. Again, it's probably like the fifth...
Well, the behaviour of some of your colleagues...
Fourth or fifth question you've asked, where you've talked about polls and politics. And you know what? I tell you what I do every day. I get up and I work hard to deliver for the country on the things that they care about.
A Prime Minister wanting to stay focused on his policy achievements,
you can see how complex it is,
but the realities of present-day politics providing no simple solutions. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Meanwhile, the latest figures from the Home Office reveal more than 900 people crossed the Channel in small boats in the past week, meaning the government has hit another unwanted milestone in its bid to curb illegal migration. 359 people made the journey by small boat yesterday. It takes the total for this year so far to 7,167, making this the first year that more than 7,000 people have arrived by small boat before the end of April. By this time last year, 5,745 people had made the journey. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in Downing Street for us tonight. And, John, those stats not going in the direction that the government would hope. And tonight, rising tensions between Dublin and Westminster. How is this likely to play out?
This is developing into a tit-for-tat row between London and Dublin. The dispute started when the Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, that's Micheál Martin, revealed that illegal migrants were moving from Northern Ireland to the Republic across the border. That prompted Rishi Sunak, in his Sky News interview with Trevor Phillips, to say, well, that shows our policy's working, the deterrent is working. Well, then the Taoiseach, that's Simon Harris, the new Taoiseach, revealed that the Justice Minister in Ireland, that's Helen McEntee, would be bringing forward proposals to their cabinet meeting on Tuesday of this week to draw up a returns policy, as he called it. In other words, send the illegal migrants back to the UK. It was also revealed that she would meet James Cleverly at a meeting here in London of the British and Irish Intergovernmental Conference, a body that's set up after the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement. Well, the latest twist in this is a pretty tough retort from a British government source who has said we will not accept any asylum returns from the EU via Ireland until the EU accepts that we can send them back to France. Well, Helen McEntee has suggested that Brexit is to blame for all this. She's calling her legislation emergency legislation, and obviously it's another headache for the Prime Minister as he battles to get his Rwanda policy literally off the ground, flights to Rwanda. The government's already talking about making plans for those flights, but by detaining some illegal migrant, and the government probably didn't see this row coming, but it seems to have walked right into it, and it's probably a row the government would rather not have.
John, thank you. The leader of Scotland's Alba Party, Alex Salmond, says he's prepared to make reasonable proposals to help Scotland's First Minister as he fights for his political career. Humza Yousaf's under pressure to agree to a renewed push for Scottish independence in return for the party's support ahead of 2 votes of no confidence this week. The SNP is a minority government with 63 MSPs out of a total of 129. There are 65 MSPs amongst the opposition parties. If they all vote against Humza Yousaf, he will be out. If Alba's sole MSP, Ash Regan, chooses to support Mr Yousaf, he will survive because the presiding officer, the 129th MSP, would vote to maintain the status quo. But Alba's support will be conditional. Our Scotland correspondent, Conor Gillis, reports.
And if you stand stepping back into the spotlight.
Good morning, Trevor, from springtime in Aberdeenshire.
Will the SNP leader of yesteryear be the man to save its current boss, Humza Yousaf, who battles to cling on?
If this is a move back to the issues of jobs, education and health and housing, then that's to be welcomed, and we'd be prepared to assist in that as long as independence is restored as a key priority of the Scottish Government.
A set of demands from Mr Salmond's Alba Party. Their sole MSP, Ash Regan, will meet the embattled SNP leader for emergency talks. She could cast the deciding vote in the looming no-confidence motion. There had been some suggestion about Salmond demanding the SNP step aside in some Scottish seats in an electoral pact. A source close to Humza Yousaf rejected that almost immediately, and Salmond has distanced himself from it already. But one SNP MP has said any alliance would go down like a cup of cold sick among their supporters. Will this pair pivot in their position? The Greens sacked from government just days ago. The same party who the First Minister also wants to talk to as he fights for his future.
The Scottish Green Group have said we will vote in support of a vote of no confidence against Humza Yousaf. And I cannot imagine anything at this point that could change that position. And I do have, trust and respect for many of my SNP colleagues, but Humza Yousaf himself has broken that. He needs to face the consequences.
Humza Yousaf will chair those critical talks as early as Monday as his career hangs in the balance, swallowing his pride in a crisis that's entering a critical phase. Conor Gillis, Sky News.
And you can scan the QR code on the screen now to listen to the latest edition of the Politics at Jack and Sam's podcast, which has just been released. This week, Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, and Politico's UK Editor, Jack Blanchard, look at the future of Humza Yousaf and the upcoming local elections. You can follow Politics at Jack and Sam's wherever you get your podcasts from. Police in Salford say they believe they've identified the man whose torso was discovered at a nature reserve early this month. They say he's a man in his 60s who was known to the two people who've been arrested, and officers have found more human remains at two new locations. Our North of England correspondent Shingi Marike reports.
It's been nearly 4 weeks since a dismembered torso was found in Manchester, sparking a murder investigation that gathered pace across the city this weekend. And now a breakthrough in their efforts to identify the victim.
We've continued to make significant progress in our investigation into human remains being found in Kersal earlier this month. From day one, our priority has been to identify the man and his family so that we can give them support and the answers that they need. Thanks to meticulous forensic work, we are now confident we have identified the man. Formal identification hasn't yet taken place, but we believe he is a man in his 60s and he lived in Salford.
The victim is expected to be formally identified in the next week, with his family being supported by specialist liaison officers. A police presence remains at a number of scenes in Greater Manchester in an effort to reassure the public. At two of those locations, more body parts were found. Here at a reservoir by divers, and just over a mile away in Woodlands, found here by a dog walker. Police are confident the remains belong to the same man, who lived with the suspects at an address they shared.
We've also been searching a house in Winton where we believe the victim and two suspects lived. We have found evidence that the victim is likely to have died there, most likely in late March. While this is significant progress, we know there is still some way to go to complete this investigation. I also recognise that details of this case will have been particularly distressing for the people of Salford and beyond, including our officers who have worked diligently to progress this investigation, and most importantly, to the man's heartbroken family.
The two suspects remain in custody, but police say they're keeping an open mind, while still appealing to the public to come forward with information as this investigation continues. Shingi Marike, Sky News, Manchester.
A man has died following an incident involving a parachute in County Durham. Emergency services were called to an industrial estate near Peterlee yesterday, where the man in his 40s was pronounced dead at the scene. Police are appealing for anyone who was travelling on the A19 who may have dashcam footage of the incident to contact them. 5 people have been killed after a tornado struck the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou. Another 33 people were injured and more than 140 factories were damaged in the manufacturing centre near Hong Kong. Meanwhile, at least 4 people have been killed and dozens injured in a series of tornadoes that swept through the US state of Oklahoma. A number of buildings were reduced to rubble in the town of Salford. Tornado warnings remain in place for more than 7 million people across the Midwest. The Duke of Sussex will return to the UK on the 8th of May to attend a ceremony marking the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games. It will be Harry's first trip to the UK since February, when he visited the King following his cancer diagnosis. It's not known if Meghan will accompany him to the UK, but the couple will then visit Nigeria after being invited by the country's Chief of Defence Staff. The White House has confirmed President Biden has spoken to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after the Israeli military said it will be ramping up aid deliveries into Gaza. It comes ahead of fresh talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at securing a ceasefire, which Hamas has pledged to attend. The October the 7th attacks and Israel's combat operations in Gaza have led to a spiralling humanitarian crisis. The IDF says getting aid to the people of Gaza is a top priority.
In the coming days, the amount of aid going into Gaza will continue to scale up even more. Food, water, medical supplies, shelter equipment, and other aid. More of it is going into Gaza than ever before.
The Archbishop of Canterbury has criticised Israel over the arrest of a Palestinian Christian woman in the occupied West Bank. Justin Welby says the plight of Layan Nasir is a breach of assurances made by Israel about the treatment of Christians. The case highlights the controversial Israeli practice of administrative detention used to hold thousands of Palestinians for months without charge. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports.
I opened the door.
The Israelis came for Lulu's daughter in the dead of night.
Entered the house with their guns on my face.
More than 20 soldiers, she says, bursting in.
Then they tell me you have to put your hands on the wall.
Threatening her family as they searched the house.
I don't have to move or do anything.
Were you scared?
Yes, because the gun was to my face.
Lulu's daughter, Layan, was taken away at gunpoint, held now in Israeli administrative detention, without charge or trial. Her family say the Israelis have told them nothing.
The worst thing, when I went to bed in the night, I start thinking how she slept, did she eat? This is very harmful to me when I start thinking in this way.
How worried are you?
I'm worried, but I can't do anything.
As a mother, that must be very difficult.
Yeah, very difficult, yes.
Have the Israelis told you anything as to why this happened? Have they explained to you why your daughter was taken that night?
No.
Nothing?
No.
The Israeli military has told Sky News Layan was arrested in view of intelligence information regarding the danger she poses to the security of the area. But the plight of this young Christian woman has prompted the intervention of the Archbishop of Canterbury. His office has told Sky News the Archbishop continues to appeal for her immediate release, or that the reasons for her detention be justified. He is deeply concerned to learn that she is now facing administrative detention for 4 months, without charge and with no due process for her, her family or lawyers to challenge this. Such processes against what is already a deeply threatened minority are contrary to commitments given over the years.
The number of Palestinians being held without charge or trial, like Layan, have almost tripled since October the 7th. They are held for 4 months, but that can be renewed every 4 months indefinitely. And we know from multiple reports that conditions inside Israel's jails are drastically worsening.
More than 3,500 Palestinians are being held under administrative detention in Israel's jails. Palestinian human rights activist Munther Amira was also taken at gunpoint from his home, beaten, he says, and then stripped naked.
While you are naked, force you to stand up and to raise your hand sometimes, to raise your leg, to open your legs.
What did that make you feel when they were doing that to you?
Very angry. I wish that they killed me before. Then I will do this thing. And I knew that they were taking pictures, photos, filming me maybe. Maybe it's the first time that I have this feeling. What is the meaning of sexual harassment?
And Munther says in the same jail he could hear prisoners from Gaza being held and abused.
So you can hear them. So they were beaten every day by the guards, every day. They were forced to make noise like the dogs. They were forced to raise their voice with things against their leadership, or they were crying. Sometimes you would hear them crying because they were beating them.
In a statement, the Israeli military told Sky News it denies general and unsubstantiated claims regarding sexual abuse of detainees in the IDF's detention facilities and the mistreatment of detainees during their time in detention or whilst under interrogation violates IDF values and contravenes IDF orders and is therefore absolutely prohibited. But NGOs like Amnesty International say the practice of detaining thousands of Palestinians without charge facilitates their inhuman and degrading treatment. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Jerusalem.
The production is slick, the pundits are sharp and the players are worshipped like gods. 15,000 fans descended on an arena in Birmingham this weekend to watch professional gamers compete for a prize of almost £250,000. But in the world of esports, that kind of money is just a drop in the ocean. Becky Cottrell reports.
Impressive production, pundits and players. This is the world of professional gaming. And in Birmingham, fans from across the world gathered to watch their icons go head-to-head. Well, from behind their screens.
I think it's more about the professional aspect of it. Like, for example, similar with football, you can go and play football, but it's nice to see people play it at such a level that you could never personally play it at.
Speaking of which, onslaught with the trample, that's enough. Just a very clean kill, and it looks like
they're playing a game called Dota 2. One gamer described it as kind of like chess, but with flashing lights and novelty characters. It's hugely popular among the esports community and lucrative for the professionals. The prize pot for this competition is almost £800,000. Jonas Volek is a pro gamer and a celebrity at events like this.
To be honest, it's not really a job, it's more of a lifestyle because it just takes so much of my time. I play, when I'm really training, it's 12 hours a day, just playing the same game, a lot of traveling, barely any time for anything else, so.
Just as in professional athletic sports, esports teams are buying and selling the best players from around the world. On the left of the stage is a UK team, but none of the players are actually from the UK. On the right is a Saudi team with a similarly international lineup.
I think many people think of the esports teams as just 5 guys who like playing the game at home, right? But the organizations that we have here, they mostly have boot camps. They have schedules that include training regimens. They include psychological visits, for example. They usually have a team manager and a team psychologist as well. It's very common these days.
But the industry and the fan base is dominated by men.
I do hope one day I'll see more women up there as well, playing the game as well in the best teams.
15,000 people descended on this arena over a week of games, not to mention those who tuned in online. The industry looks set to keep growing, although it's a phenomenon that's still a complete unknown to many. And as for this game, I'm not sure I could explain any of what actually happened. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Birmingham.
Time now to get the rest of the sports news with Vishali.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
The big reveal. In Paris, unveiling Olympic and Paralympic kits. This, the look for Team GB. Back to basics. Classic red, white and blue. Style simplicity from Adidas.
I've been in the process of getting ready for Paris for years, and then all of a sudden it becomes real and it's all coming to life. So yeah, it's very exciting to get in the kit, and it just makes me feel very proud and think I really want to make sure that I get here.
This, a traditional look to Team GB, at a time when variations on flag designs by sports teams has stoked heated debates. Team GB hope this kit will put the traditionalist minds at rest with a very patriotic design and no tinkering at all with the Union Jack. There it is in red, white and blue. For athletes, it's the technical specifications that matter most to maximise performance.
I was actually consulted in the design process for the Paralympic side of things as well, and we thought about access features, and the team really focused on not just the performance side of it, but also the functionality and the access side of it as well.
The specific needs of female athletes now a focus for designers.
I think as an athlete you want to feel at your best when you're out there competing, so you want to feel confident and comfortable in your kit.
Sometimes athletes feeling kits might be too skimpy.
Yeah, I think every athlete is completely different. I think it's about having a broad response from a large section of athletes to understand, well, how do we make the kit more appropriate for you, and how do you feel more confident in the kit that you wear? And I think the key thing is putting the athletes at the heart of that.
Athletes know how they'll look at the games, now just needing to secure places to compete in the summer. To deliver the 66 Olympic medals Team GB is projected to win. Rob Harris, Sky News, Paris.
take me back to this time a year ago. What were you thinking about where you wanted to go, what you wanted to do after finishing the WSL season?
I was playing at Everton at the time, and obviously for the Danish national team as well, but I also felt ready for new adventures. I've always seen being a footballer as something I love to do, but also an opportunity to explore the world and live in different countries, different cities, and playing the game I love.
And then you went to the World Cup. Talk to me about that. What was that experience like? Because it must have just been incredible for you.
Yeah, it was just amazing being at the World Cup. I didn't know it was going to be one of my last experiences as a footballer, but I'm just really happy I got to play in it and experience what the women's game and where it's going.
And then what happened over the summer, because it was a big...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Stephen Bush, Financial Times Associate Editor and columnist, and Kate Andrews, The Spectator's Economics Editor. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the I newspaper. Their headline, Sunak to resist early election as Tory rebels on manoeuvres. We'll be right back. Do stay with us.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone, I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Tensions are rising between Dublin and Westminster after Ireland announced plans to send asylum seekers back over the border to the UK. And the UK said it would reject them. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has been told to commit to a new push for independence if he's to win the support of Alex Salmond's Alba party and see off this week's votes of no confidence. And police in Greater Manchester have identified the man whose torso was found in Salford earlier this month, after human remains were found in 2 other locations. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Stephen Bush, Financial Times Associate Editor and columnist, and Kate Andrews, The Spectator's Economics Editor. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Eye claims the Prime Minister will not call an early election as groups of his own MPs plot to oust him in anticipation of disastrous local election results. The Mirror leads with demands for Rishi Sunak to call a general election. The Guardian says the Home Office will launch a major operation to detain asylum seekers across Britain on Monday in preparation for their deportation to Rwanda. The Telegraph reports the government has accused the EU of double standards after Ireland vowed to send asylum seekers to the UK despite France refusing to take back Channel migrants. The Mail's front page says thousands of foreign nationals entering Britain on visas are lodging asylum claims to stay permanently. Millions on disability benefits face the biggest welfare reforms in a generation, according to The Times. That could mean those with depression and anxiety lose their payments. The FT reports that the largest Western banks that remain in Russia paid the Kremlin nearly £700 million of taxes last year, despite promises to minimise their Russian exposure after the invasion of Ukraine. The Metro says the price of a pint is set to rise after heavy rain over autumn and winter. Dame Esther Rantzen says she's fighting for her family and lots of others as MPs hold a landmark debate on assisted dying, which the Express says was prompted by their petition. The Sun's front page features the last words of a Gogglebox star who died in an accident recently. Britain is set for a bank holiday heatwave thanks to a plume of warm weather coming via Berlin. That's according to The Star. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Stephen Bush and Kate Andrews. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Eye front page. Their headline, Sunak to resist early election as Tory rebels on manoeuvres. We have been reading for some time that the Tory rebels are on manoeuvres. Is this really the point at which we will see some dissent against Rishi Sunak, do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, I think, even though in some ways all that is likely to happen at the local elections is it will confirm what every other set of elections we've had in the last 2 years, which is that the polls are about right, it is always a different experience for a political party when it undergoes a sort of nationwide electoral test and it flunks it, right? So I think then there will be an outbreak of panic among some Conservative MPs. But, of course, some Conservative MPs have always disliked Rishi Sunak. I think we're probably some way from that expression of panic being something he has to worry about. But I imagine he probably will end up having to face a confidence vote because, of course, it only takes 52 panicked Conservative MPs to trigger one. But you need many more Conservative MPs than 52 for the Prime Minister to be at danger of losing his job.
You can see how they almost accidentally find themselves in a situation where they're voting on the confidence of the Prime Minister, and many MPs didn't actually mean to try to trigger another leadership election. It's not exactly obvious that that is what the public is desperate for, and if that happens, then it's just really unknown what happens from there, because Rishi Sunak will be in a very difficult position where he will have to see his own MPs, some of which will vote against him. Even if he wins, and I think he would probably be likely to win a vote of no confidence, it puts him in a very difficult position, not just in terms of his own premiership, but to continue to lead the country. And that is, I think, why you still have these outstanding questions about whether or not you might see an election before August probably in July, because it is pretty well known at this point that the government would like the opportunity to do another fiscal event. They would like the opportunity to offer another tax cut. That would have to be happening in the autumn, but they could almost be bounced into having to act before.
The Eye reporting that a backbencher familiar with rebel discussions says that his removal seems inevitable. Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to be honest, it's a serious plot in that it's well organised and it has some serious money and staffing behind it. But this, from a competence perspective, is probably the least serious attempt to get rid of a Prime Minister than we've seen for a very long time. And then there are a lot of people involved in it who will talk a big game, but they don't have a plausible plan to get a majority of the parliamentary party on board with getting rid of the Prime Minister, and they don't have an alternative candidate. So I think there's a possibility that Rishi Sunak could...
Well, there have been names like Penny Mordaunt.
Yeah, but then people like Penny Mordaunt saying, yeah, thanks but no thanks, because broadly speaking, the average member of the Conservative Parliamentary Party knows full well that their problems didn't start with Rishi Sunak and are not going to end by getting rid of him. And the average person who's ambitious and wants to lead the Tory party does not think, oh, do you know what, I want to be someone who was Prime Minister for 4 months and then lost really badly. So
It's the last thing they want.
Yeah, exactly. So this thing is that it's very hard to get rid of a leader when you don't have an alternative candidate. That's why the confidence vote in Boris Johnson failed. It's why the confidence vote in Theresa May failed. What got rid of those two leaders was when a leader emerged, Boris Johnson in the case of Theresa May, Rishi Sunak in the case of Boris Johnson, who was willing to say, I think there's a problem and we need a change. And unless over the next week or so someone in the cabinet stands up and goes, we need a change, and quits, Rishi Sunak is going to be in Downing Street until, you know, October, November, January, or whenever he comes into contact with the electorate himself, and I suspect after that he won't be in Downing Street.
It does feel as though people who are now saying that the Prime Minister will have to leave, realistically, the mechanism to do that from their perspective would be a general election, and this is all very ironic because they are also on the right. They're also within the Conservative Party, but as Stephen has pointed out, for all those reasons, a confidence vote and then a leadership election afterwards is probably not the mechanism this time round.
OK, let's move on to The Guardian. Stephen, you take us into this story, and that is that the Home Office will launch a major operation to detain asylum seekers across Britain from tomorrow.
Yes, from tomorrow. So officials plan to hold refugees who turn up for routine meetings at immigration services or at bail appointments or other contacts with the state to pick up people nationwide in a surprise 2-week exercise. This is in preparation for what they hope will be the first flight to Rwanda of people who've come here by irregular routes. There are, big political and ideological objections to this, and I'm sure Kate will be perfectly eloquent on those. But actually, just from the government's own perspective, I'm not convinced that this is going to be a very effective plan, because broadly speaking, if you're a lawyer, you are going to protect your client by putting as many legal obstacles as you can between them and a flight to Rwanda. And it's perfectly easy and, arguably open and shut to say, if my client was told to come here for one reason and was then arrested, there's not a fair case to put them on this flight, even before all of the questions about individual claims and the safety of Rwanda, because although the bill means you can no longer bring group claims and argues that Rwanda is a safe country in general, it does still give people the opportunity to bring cases against their individual deportation. So I think we might look back at this as yet another step on the road to failing on the Rwanda policy.
And Kate, do you think that simply people won't be turning up for these routine appointments, perhaps on advice of their lawyers?
Well, it's certainly possible if they're aware of this new piece of information. One of the biggest criticisms of the Safety of Rwanda Act was that it did not distinguish between those who might be abusing the asylum system, those who might be coming for economic reasons, and genuine asylum claims. And what we heard constantly from ministers is, don't worry, we'll get around to that bit. What's so concerning about this news is that they are jumping right in to trying to detain migrants who they want to put on these planes. You are going to have people being detained who are some of the most vulnerable people who've been through things we do not want to imagine. They're going to be bringing them in for routine services. They're saying that they're even going to be doing a 2-week blitz where they try to find people and round them up. I mean, expect to see a lot of media around this. The government thinks this is going to go down well. They think this is an important part of their election strategy. You are going to have a lot of tragic stories wrapped up in all of this. And that will be a real consequence that the government was warned about, that if you don't make provisions for genuine asylum seekers, you are going to lump them in with a lot of other people, and that way is simply to lead to disaster, because unless you are from a few select countries, there is no legal way to come to the UK as an asylum seeker, except to show up and say, I am one. And the new plan, and I think this is going to be very public, is that you'll be detained.
And into the mix, furthering this discussion of illegal migration, we have the deterioration, I suppose, in relation between Dublin and Westminster, with Dublin saying that they will send any migrants back to the UK, and the UK saying that we won't accept them. That's coming up in the Times.
Yeah, this is a consequence, really, of the way that our relationship with the EU has changed since Brexit. And basically, the EU's plan for managing irregular migration has long been, well, we'll get a country on our border to deal with it for us, paying quite a lot of money to Turkey to deal with it, or quite a lot of money to the various contested governments in Libya to deal with that problem. Now, understandably, if you are the British Prime Minister, you go, well, I don't want to do that. That's going to be really unpopular politically for me here at home. And so there was always going to be an element of friction between the UK and its nearest European neighbour, because we are now on the frontier of the EU's own difficulties with irregular migration. I suspect that where this round will ultimately resolve itself is that, as the government says in this story, look, we're not going to have a deal to return people from the UK to Ireland while there's not a deal to return people from the EU to the UK. But you've got to give to get in any negotiation, and I think it's going to be quite hard for a Conservative Prime Minister who, despite having been a Leaver for much longer than Boris Johnson, is not wholly trusted by many of the Leavers in his own parliamentary party. I think it's probably going to be hard for him in particular to do anything to resolve this particular row at a time when, as we've discussed earlier, he's got lots of problems with his party as it is.
Kate, how do you see it playing out?
Well, this is more complex because the Irish government is actually attempting to overturn a judgment in the Irish High Court last month, as the Times reports, saying that it would be unlawful to return asylum seekers to the UK because of the Rwanda scheme, because they don't deem that to be lawful. Now, expect the UK government to make quite a big deal out of this, the fact that the Irish government almost seemingly is in a slight way endorsing the Rwanda scheme, because they're saying, no, we do want to send them back. It can't be that bad. Rishi Sunak's point and the government's point will be every European country is having to deal with this. The irony of that is that Europe is going to have to work together to solve it. And to Stephen's point, we're very far away from that happening.
The Prime Minister making the point in his interview with Trevor Phillips on Sky News that the fact that people are moving into Ireland shows that the Rwanda scheme is acting as a deterrent already.
Well, it's possible. I think it's unlikely, given that people have already crossed the Channel, the world's busiest shipping lane, that they're going, oh dear, the tiny possibility that the government might one day be organised enough to put me on a flight to Rwanda is then causing them to cross into the Irish border. Ultimately, the reason why, there are two types of country in this world. Countries people want to leave and countries people want to come into. We're lucky in the UK that we're a country people want to come into, but that does have its own challenges, particularly if you are a country next to a big trade bloc which ideally wants to palm the problem off onto you. He is, however, right to say, as he said in the interview this morning, that the whole of the European centre-right is going this way. I think things like the Rwanda scheme, currently a bit of an oddity, are going to become increasingly normal as an option that European countries want to reach for. The difficulty is there is, as yet, no evidence that these schemes work.
Or that there are that many countries that want to volunteer themselves to be where people go.
We've just got about a minute to getting to the Guardian story regarding Thames Water's financial collapse and the ramifications of that.
Yes, this is the warning from the UK's Debt Management Office, which is saying that if Thames Water were to collapse, you could see more economic instability. And the comparison on the front page of The Guardian is the kind that we saw after Liz Truss's mini-budget, suggesting that there would be a spike in borrowing costs, that markets would expect a greater return. I would want to see more details in this story, because I think it would be very unclear that markets would think that Thames Water would be allowed to go bust, really. It would be quite obvious it would be taken into administration. I don't think even the government has been too unclear about that. It just does remind us how high those borrowing costs are right now, though, and how expensive things are for the government. It's probably another reason you wouldn't see a lot of state investment in water were it to be renationalised.
OK, we will leave it there. Kate and Stephen for the moment. Coming up, the Metro warns that beer drinkers are set to be out of pocket due to Britain's wet weather. We'll be discussing that next. Stay with us.
What we have developed is actually a portable cooling device, which you then attach a silicone head cap, who is intended to be used in the acute phase of injury to treat concussions. In fact, sports-related concussions are in fact unique because athletes has this elevated brain temperature in general when doing sports. And it's well known to when you have that, that's negative and it increases the risk of a worsened outcome when suffering a concussion. So what Polar Cap then aims to do is to reduce that exercise-induced elevated brain temperature in the acute phase of injury. I was fortunate to play professional ice hockey for 17 years in Sweden. And with that comes injuries, such as concussions. And me, myself, suffered maybe 5 during my career. And it was actually a concussion that ended my career. So that in combination with my academic background being an engineer, I decided to see can potentially concussions be treated in the acute phase? And can you then lower the risks of these long-term consequences that unfortunately many athletes suffers? And that was the main reason for me joining. And I'm very happy now to see that after many years of clinical evidence gathering, we now see that actually you can lower that risk. Our goal is that this could be used and should be used by all sports that has a risk of suffering concussions or having concussions. And we're thrilled now that we have a collaboration with the United Rugby Championship, for instance, and we have a lot of rugby clubs also in Europe. And yes, I would say that why not take the chance of lowering the risk of long-term problems when suffering a concussion, regardless of which sport or wherever you get it. It's well known that being warmer when suffering a concussion increases the risk of a worsened outcome. So in that case, it's been quite obvious that it would most likely be beneficial to cool. And that was like the foundation when this was initiated in 2015, 2016.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Stephen Bush, Financial Times Associate Editor and columnist, and Kate Andrews, the Spectator Economics Editor. Let's have a look at the FT, front page of the Financial Times. And this story about foreign banks in Russia that have paid fourfold in terms of the tax that they paid to the Kremlin. And this is despite them promising to minimise their business in Russia following on from the Ukraine war.
Yeah, so some of this is about assets that these banks can't move from Russia for one reason or another. So as global interest rates have gone up, the interest on those reserves has gone up, they've paid more in profit. But some of it is about other activities, and some of it is because these Western banks, these 7 banks, are not sanctioned because they're not Russian banks, so they can still access the global payment system. Now, yeah, this is an important story for lots of reasons, not least, and it speaks to the anxiety across much of Europe that, there's been a failure to give Ukraine all of the arms it needs in order to repel the Russian invasion. There's an American election in which it looks very possible that Donald Trump, president who has suggested he could end the war overnight, and he almost certainly does not mean by helping Ukraine win, could come in. And then, in addition, their sanctions regime has proved ineffective. The Russian economy is still going. banks, some would say, and indeed some would say correctly, that because they can't get out, but, are still having to pay into the Russian war machine. So this is a story that is going to cause a lot of chatter and a lot of anxiety across Europe and across Whitehall.
But, Kate, it's benefiting these foreign banks to remain in Russia because their profits have increased, haven't they?
Well, to some extent, to part of Stephen's point there, they can't access all of this to take it out or to enjoy the benefits of the profit. But as the FT reports, there has been a huge jump of 800 million euros in tax, up from 200 in 2021. And it does raise larger questions about the extent to which these sanctions are working against Russia. And I think that has been actually a mixed picture. While you have had some success, you also have complications like this, or actually keeping money in one place where you can't access it, it's essentially frozen, it's accruing interest and there has to be tax paid on that. So I think it does continue to paint that mixed picture that what are sometimes good intentions do not pan out with the consequences that you'd like.
Let's have a look at the Times. Then this story regarding a benefits shake-up, perhaps the largest for very many years. Stephen, take us into this story.
Yeah, so millions of people on disability benefits face the biggest changes in a generation, which would mean which could mean those with sickness and with depression and anxiety lose their payments. Now, the thing which is politically difficult here is that for the Labour Party is they would find it very hard to oppose further oppose further reductions in the benefits bill, which would mean they would have to find some form of alternative tax rises to meet those costs from elsewhere, which is something they would also be very reluctant to do. But the very real human cost here is it's not, I would say, wholly clear what the policy case for what the government is doing. We have a problem with economic inactivity among people in their over 50s generally for physical conditions, and a problem of rising anxiety and depression among people who are still in some form of work in their 20s and 30s. So it's not obvious that the lever that they are pulling is going to fix the policy problem, but it is going to create a hell of a political headache for the Labour Party.
Is welfare reform going to be a key dividing line, do you think?
The government wants it to be because they don't think that the Labour Party is going to be willing to touch it, especially going into an election. There was a report from the Office for National Statistics which showed that at the start of last year, over 50% of the people who were registered inactive with long-term sickness had anxiety or depression as their top ailment. And of that group, 80% were deemed too unwell to work at all. I think those numbers have particularly caught the government's attention. They are increasingly worried that for some people, not all people, but some people suffering from anxiety and depression, getting them out of work, getting them away from other people, away from social interaction is going to make the problem worse, not better. And so I think there is a genuine human element to this where they're thinking, are we really making the right prescriptions? Are we really doing the right thing by removing people from work altogether? But of course, there's the political note as well, in which they think that this might play well with the electorate, and Labour will struggle to answer these questions.
The Prime Minister has said he's on a moral mission to reform welfare and warned that too many people are being parked on benefits. Just time to talk about the fact that the price of beer is going through the roof. Well, why, Stephen?
Bad weather. So it was a very rainy autumn, as people may remember, although many of us have kind of repressed that, which is going to hit the price of beer because it's going to hit the price of hops because it was a worse harvest than usual as a result of that bad weather. And so that means that the pint you're drinking will be more expensive.
And bread as well?
It's not mentioned
biscuits?
Here, but yeah,
bread and biscuits.
Oh, is it? Yes, we got biscuits here as well. Yeah, depressing news given the fact that I think we've got used to inflation slowing, prices slowing, but certainly not dropping. They're still rising a bit, and if it rises on beer specifically, that's going to disappoint a lot of people going into the summer, myself included.
You a beer drinker?
I'm, to be honest, more concerned about the biscuits cost. It might be helpful for my waistline.
Me
if they got
too,
me
too. Stephen and Kate, thank you very much for the moment. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. On the way next week, but the unsettled and wet theme will persist with heavy rain at times. It will be a chilly start to Monday morning with a touch of frost where skies stay clear overnight. Scattered showers will affect the far north of Scotland and western fringes of Britain, with more persistent rain for Ireland and Northern Ireland. Outbreaks of rain, heavy at times, will spread eastwards into much of Scotland, Wales and Western England through the day, accompanied by brisk winds. Meanwhile, eastern parts of England will be drier, brighter and warmer too. The rain will be heaviest over the hills of Wales, Cumbria and western Scotland. Brighter skies will follow for Ireland as the rain here clears to scattered showers. It will feel noticeably warmer in the sunshine on Tuesday, but there will be some showers or longer spells of rain, especially in the windier west. Temperatures will continue to creep up midweek, but eastern coasts will be cooler on Wednesday with a risk of rain in the south. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the escalating row between Ireland and the UK over migration as Dublin vows to return asylum seekers to the UK and Westminster says it will refuse to accept them.